elections are slated for January 30th under the Constitution.
Yeah, January 25th, I hope. By then,
sorry, end of January. Let me ask you a question to try to put it in a regional context, Prime Minister. You know, if we look back at the Middle East now over the last, since the American invasion of Iraq, you know, you could say that, you know, America decapitated the regime of Saddam Hussein. It was, I think, instrumental in pushing Syria out of Lebanon. It was instrumental in getting Mubarak to loosen up a little bit in Egypt. And it was instrumental in pushing the Palestinian elections that brought Hamas to power. And what you can see in all four of these theaters is that when the lid got loosened, the parties that first were able to take advantage of it were all the Islamist parties. In Iraq, it was Skiri. In Lebanon, it was Hezbollah. West Bank, it was Hamas. And in Egypt, it was the Muslim Brotherhood. Seems to me, over the last couple of years, you've had a very interesting backlash. That the Islamists ruled. I think they messed up and they overreached in a lot of areas. And you've had a kind of interesting moderate backlash. We saw the pro-Iranian party decimated in the Iraqi provincial election in January. We saw Hezbollah defeated in the Lebanese election. We saw what happened in Tehran. And I sense, and this is really not my question, is that same backlash now happening in the West Bank and Gaza vis-a-vis Hamas? Therefore, if there were elections in January, how do you look at that? Do you see the elections as an opportunity for the kind of moderate mainstream to do what happened in Lebanon, to do what happened in Iraq, to do what happened in Iran in the West Bank?
I agree with describing the former case, the one where Islamists ascended to power, certainly in Palestine and other places, as a backlash, in the sense that anybody who drove against traffic would have won those elections. It was more a reflection of unsettlement, unhappiness.
With the Fatah regime.
With status quo, generally, whether in Palestine, whether elsewhere.
Yeah.
And you know, that actually is really more like an ideology. It combines elements from far left to far right. What combines them all is rejection of status quo. After decades of disenchantment with status quo, a lot of things go into this, including not only lack of settlement politically of the overall issue, but also social injustice or sense of social injustice, inequity, poor governance, ineffective governance, and the rest of it. That is, I think, something I can go along with describing as a backlash. It may be the latter wave could be described as a backlash. I hope not. I hope it's really more...
if elections are held, though, in January, who do you think will win? Will Hamas be able to sweep these elections? Will Fatah, the more mainstream movements, be able to make a comeback? What are the calculations of whether or not elections will or should be held?
First of all, this is not January. We're still six months away from that, 7 months. And God knows what may be happening then to alter or to influence the calculations, influence people's decision making. But an analysis of what had happened in early 2006, I think there is pretty much consensus on the factors that led to rise to eminence of Hamas and groups like Hamas. One I mentioned, I mean, just basically unhappiness with status quo, it having failed miserably in delivering on promises and all. And the history of this is long and is very well known without really getting into it. And with the way, the world, the powers to be, including Washington, viewed the world and dealt with third world countries, whether in the Middle East, whether in Africa, whether in Asia. But that's history. There are other elements, as a matter of fact. Fatah had been in power, whether in the context of the PA or as the dominant faction within the Palestinian political system, that's the PLO. And before then, there are the failures of the political process. There are the failures of governance that everybody knows about. Corruption and perception of it and impropriety.
But would you like elections to be held?
Definitely.
You would?
Elections in January of next year are a constitutionally mandated right of the Palestinian people, and they should be held in January of next year. Period. No discussion. I think, when people were talking about early elections, that's a different matter. Early elections require consensus. Sometimes they are provided for in constitutions of countries. Sometimes the head of state has that power. In Palestine, the head of state does not have the power to call early elections. One of the shortcomings of the system, as the legislature for a while was working on weakening the presidency, we ended up stuck with a system where nobody can short-circuit elections or call early elections.
So
Early elections require consensus, but constitutionally mandated elections in January of 2010 should happen. That's an absolute right for people. They should happen. And I think that ought to be the driving force and part of the political effort that should be mounted in order to make a win by people who and factions of a persuasion that's based on a sensible approach to governance, sensible approach to delivering, the Palestinian people that which we desperately need, freedom, where they would have much better chance of winning. One way of doing this is actually to act on behalf of the people and in their interests. And one way in which you can do that, specifically in this case, is not to act, and certainly not to be seen as acting, as getting in the way of people enjoying that which is an absolute right, to have elections. So clearly, this is part of the overall political effort that should be mounted to win people over. It is no secret that Hamas does not want elections in January of next year.
Because they think they'll lose?
I mean, I don't know what other reasons they may have. That seems to be...
It's usually a pretty good reason not to have elections.
that seems to be the calculus.